they didn't erase me all at once. It started quietly, an invite that vanished, a report with my name scrubbed, a roster missing one line that should have been mine. 17 years of building trust, reduced to silence, dressed up as progress. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd step aside. But they forgot one thing. The contract still carried my name. And when a $50 million deal hung on that ink, I became impossible to ignore. They never remembered the exact time, but I did. It was 8:57 a.m. on a gray Tuesday when the first email hit my inbox, a frantic subject line screaming, "Urgent. Audit log issue, immediate review needed." By 9:14, I had already located the corrupted server logs, cross-verified the document IDs against the compliance archive, and sent back a tidy package, one timestamped screenshot, one notarized PDF, and a full list of every access in the last 12 months. Before most of the office had finished stirring sugar into their lattes, the problem was solved, documented, and archived. No one said thank you. They rarely did. 17 years at Harrison and Cole had trained me not to expect gratitude. I wasn't the kind of employee people noticed, at least, not until something broke. My name was the one muttered in frustration when a database froze, or whispered in relief when a renewal miraculously cleared federal compliance. In a building full of suits who spoke in PowerPoint slides and catchphrases, I was the quiet machinery behind the curtain, the ghost in the system. My name is Margaret Ellison Maggie to the few who bothered, and I kept this firm alive long past the expiration date it deserved. Fortress Dynamics, our most valuable client, a defense contractor with contracts threaded through government corridors, trusted me in a way they trusted no one else. In 2016, when a vendor mishap nearly sank a $50 million renewal, I pulled us back from the cliff. Fortress didn't forget. They rewrote Clause 11.4 of the contract to mandate that only I, Margaret Ellison, could authorize any future renewals. My name wasn't just ink on paper, it was the lock and the key. Inside the office, though, I was invisible. I didn't dress loud, didn't post emojis in Slack, didn't pitch buzzwords in meetings. My evenings belonged to my cat, a worn Kindle, and the fiddle leaf fig I kept stubbornly alive despite my overwatering habit. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't charming, but I was precise. And precision was the only thing Fortress ever cared about. For a long time, that invisibility was a kind of armor. Until Ethan Cross walked in. He arrived on a Monday morning with the kind of handshake that lasted 2 seconds too long, the cologne of a man who mistook confidence for confidence, and a resume that screamed disruption. Vice President of Strategic Accounts, imported fresh from a Boston firm with a lowercase name and a neon logo. Ethan looked like LinkedIn had built him in a lab, 2 tight shirts to show off gym hours, sneakers that announced tech chic, and a smile polished for investor decks. Within a week, he was best friends with Chloe Simmons, the CEO's niece, who floated through marketing with pastel blazers and family immunity. By week 2, he had Ryan Patel, a junior analyst barely out of grad school, carrying his laptop like a squire at court. By week 3, my calendar invites began to vanish. One by one. Meetings I'd hosted for over a decade disappeared without explanation. Audit prep reviews, vendor syncs, compliance drills gone, streamlined into Ethan's glossy new structure. My name was absent from threads where my reports were shared without credit. My initials were missing from project decks I had written line by line. But I didn't push back. I documented. Every deleted invite went into a folder on my desktop I titled Change Log. Every email that excluded me. Every draft that reappeared with someone else's name. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing. The thing about being invisible is that people assume you're harmless. But invisibility can also mean freedom. Freedom to watch. Freedom to notice. Freedom to collect the kind of details no one else bothers to keep. The first time I saw my initials erased from the Fortress Dynamics portal, I felt it in my stomach, a small, sharp twist. The system, one I had maintained for nearly 2 decades, now listed Ethan Cross as the primary contact. Not me. I refreshed. Checked the metadata. Checked again. The contract archive naming convention, something I had built with Fortress's compliance officer years ago, had been altered. My name was gone. No one had asked. No one had told me. When I called Joel, the project lead at Fortress, to confirm timelines, he didn't sound concerned. As long as you're still on the signature line, Maggie, we're good. We trust you. I smiled into the phone, but it didn't reach my chest. Because I knew better than anyone, once erasure begins, it doesn't stop. It creeps, subtle and relentless, like ink bleeding across a page. That afternoon, I returned to my desk to find a junior hire settling into my workspace. Ethan's assistant had accidentally booked out my seat for Q1. A system glitch, she said. Sure. The week after, Chloe sent a cheery email to the strategic accounts roster. Holiday project alignment final list attached. Final. Cute. My name wasn't there. It didn't start with fireworks. It never does. No screaming matches, no slammed doors. Just small deletions. Quiet absences. Whispers of removal disguised as efficiency. And yet, they had forgotten something crucial. I may not have had their spotlight, but I had the pen. It began with a list. Names neatly typed in Calibri, arranged like ornaments strung across an email subject line. Holiday roster, final. I opened it late in the afternoon, the office lights casting their usual sterile glow, and scanned down the page. Ethan's name. Chloe's. Ryan's. A half-dozen others. My eyes moved line by line, as if my name might have slipped between the letters, camouflaged, waiting to be found. But it wasn't there. I stared at the word final. Such an innocent word, dressed in lowercase charm. But for me, it landed like a steel door slamming shut. No one said it aloud, but the message was clear. I was no longer part of the team. The next morning, Ethan stood at the front of conference room C, sleeves rolled, collar open, grinning like he was about to deliver salvation. We need to start looking forward, he announced, pacing the length of the room with a click of designer sneakers against the tile. History's important, sure, but innovation, that's the engine. And this team? We're the new engine. He didn't look at me, not directly, but the air between us prickled with implication. Margaret's got the historicals, he added casually, a dismissive wave of his hand, but our focus is momentum. Clients don't care about the wheel that's already turning, they care about the next spin. Chloe laughed too brightly, the sound rehearsed. Ryan nodded so hard I thought his head might snap from its own eagerness. I didn't flinch. I let the words settle, sinking into me like cold needles. Then, slowly, deliberately, I wrote one line in my notebook. Dec 7th, 10:14 a.m. Public erasure, phrased as progress. When people imagine betrayal, they think of knives or shouting, of slammed doors and fiery ultimatums. But real betrayal is softer, quieter. It's the steady turning of a wheel that leaves you standing still. A forgotten CC. A missing name on a roster. A laugh that excludes you. The office, once predictable in its rituals, became a gallery of these small disappearances. My reports, meticulously prepared, resurfaced in Chloe's decks with the title, Final Draft, Simmons. Meeting invites I had sent for 10 straight years were now hosted by Ryan, his voice cracking as he stumbled through agendas he didn't understand. And Ethan stood tall at the center, branding each deletion as streamlining. But I didn't fight. I observed. My desktop folder, changelog, swelled with evidence, screenshots of missing invites, forwarded threads stripped of my credit, agendas rewritten with my name excised. I captured them all, not as souvenirs of cruelty, but as artifacts of a strategy one understood better than they did. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit: motion is not control. You can paint walls, shuffle org charts, rename meetings, flood inboxes with enthusiasm. But none of it means anything if you don't control the contract, the trust, the signature. Ethan spun motion like gold. But control that was mine. Still, knowing that didn't quiet the sting. There were nights I went home and sat in the half-light of my apartment, bourbon bottle heavy in my hand, wondering when invisibility had turned from armor into a cage. My cat curled at my feet, unaware, and I would stare at the ceiling, asking a silent question: how many times can you be erased before you vanish entirely? The answer came in the form of a deadline. Fortress Dynamics renewal, our crown jewel, a $50 million pipeline of revenue and reputation, was set for December. The contract I had built, the clause I had negotiated, the trust one had nursed like a fragile flame, was ready for its next cycle. And Ethan, of course, smelled opportunity. Fresh blood shows momentum, he declared in one planning session, his voice syrup-smooth, his smile unshakable. Chloe and Ryan will take the lead on the renewal pitch. It's time to showcase our new energy. I asked a single question, evenly, calmly. You're saying I should remove myself from Fortress? He chuckled as if I'd misheard the gospel. Not remove. Elevate. You've earned altitude, Maggie. Let the next generation handle the weeds. The words slid over the table like oil, and for a moment I saw myself reflected in his grin. Not a partner, not a colleague, but an obstacle he was politely dismantling. That night, back at my desk, I opened the HR portal. A blank PTO request stared back at me. Fingers steady, I typed, December 19th to 23rd. Reason: personal. The exact week of the renewal signing. Then I hit submit. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was preparation. The days leading up to December blurred into a cruel pantomime. Ethan strutted through the corridors with a confidence that reeked of cologne and desperation. Chloe rehearsed her pastel slides, and Ryan scurried like a nervous understudy. I watched, silent, invisible, the ghost in the system who had once been the system itself. In private moments, though, the silence was heavier. I thought of Joel from Fortress, his voice steady on the phone. As long as you're still on the signature line, Maggie, we're good. We trust you. Those words, meant as reassurance, felt like prophecy. Because they had forgotten the simplest truth: ink on paper outweighs noise in a room. The erasure continued. The Christmas party invite lists my name missing. The bonus thread excluded. The calendar syncs purged. It was a phase out, and I recognized the pattern. I had seen it happen to others, long before Ethan arrived with his all birds and his startup slogans. But never had anyone been foolish enough to attempt it in the middle of a $50 million renewal that required my literal, non-negotiable signature. By the second week of December, I no longer needed bourbon to numb the irony. I drank tea instead, strong and black, each sip sharpening the edge of my resolve. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence can also be a blade. I closed my laptop each evening with the calm finality of a coffin lid, adding one more note to the change log. One more tally in the archive of erasures. My absence wasn't weakness. It was design. Because when the boardroom lights burned brightest and the Fortress delegation arrived with contracts in hand, they would discover the truth written in ink long before Ethan's buzzwords ever reached their ears. And I intended to let that ink speak for itself. The snow had barely melted from the sidewalks when Fortress Dynamics arrived. 4 of them, in tailored coats and government eyes, were ushered into Harrison and Cole's executive boardroom at precisely 9 a.m. Their leader, Joel Maddox, set a leather-bound folder on the oak table without flourish, his movements slow, deliberate, weighted with the authority of a man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. Ethan was already there, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet like a speaker about to give a keynote no one requested. Chloe adjusted her blazer in pastel shades of optimism. Ryan shuffled a stack of slides he barely understood, and for once, the air was still anticipation heavy as thunder. "This will be seamless," Ethan began, flashing the grin he'd been practicing since Boston. "We've prepared the decks, the roadmaps. The bonuses are tied to project rollouts. Harrison and Cole is ready for the next chapter." Joel didn't smile. He simply opened the folder, flipped past pages of compliance, past the fine print of federal obligations, until he reached the back. His hand stopped, finger pressed firmly on the signature block. Bold serif letters stared up from the page. Margaret A. Ellison, Strategic Account Custodian. His eyes lifted. Calm, but direct. "Where's Margaret?" For a second, silence held the room hostage. Ethan blinked, his grin stuttering. Margaret's currently on personal leave. I'll be handling the sign-off on her behalf. Everything's in order." Joel didn't move the folder. Clause 11.4 states the signer must be the original custodian. "That's Margaret." Chloe leaned forward, her voice sugared. "We've had some internal updates. Ethan's leading strategic accounts now. Margaret's role has shifted. But of course, our quality remains top-tier dash." Joel snapped the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gavel. "I didn't ask about your org chart. I asked where Margaret is. Unless she's dead or in witness protection, we need her signature." Ryan, sweating through his shirt, attempted levity. "Guess we'll have to resurrect her before end of day, huh?" The silence that followed was terminal. Ethan cleared his throat, his polished veneer cracking. "We've spoken with legal and believe we can dash." Joel's eyes narrowed. "You believe incorrectly. We wrote clause 11.4 after your 2015 mishap, when your vendor leaked classified schedules. That clause exists for one reason. No Margaret, no contract." He stood, sharp and final. "We'll be at the Union Hotel across the street. You have until 5 p.m. to produce Margaret Ellison with a pen in her hand." And just like that, Fortress Dynamics left. No small talk, no handshakes, only the echo of boots across the marble floor. The moment the door closed, panic erupted. Ethan slammed his tablet onto the table with the desperation of a gambler down to his last chip. Chloe's lipstick smile wavered, mascara smudging at the corners. Ryan stared at the contract as if it might magically rewrite itself. Within minutes, legal was summoned, bagels still in hand, confusion etched into every line of their faces. Mandy, compliance veteran and patron saint of exhaustion, scrolled through the contract on her laptop. "It's unambiguous," she said flatly. "Clause 11.4 requires Margaret's wet signature. No proxies. No exceptions. Fortress knows it. They insisted on it." Ethan's jaw clenched. "What if someone else signs and we backdate it?" Chloe Ryan dash. "No." Mandy cut in without looking up. It has to be Margaret. And Fortress knows it. They wrote the clause. I've got the revision history to prove it. Chloe, her voice climbing toward panic, whispered, but we're the ones doing the work now, right? Can't we just sign and say Margaret approved it informally? Mandy finally looked up, her eyes sharp as glass. Sure. And then we can fold the contract into a paper airplane and throw it out the window. That's how much it'll hold. The room spun in waves of denial and desperation. Ethan barked orders. Chloe dialed my number 3 times, her manicured nails tapping against her phone as each call went unanswered. Ryan paced like a man facing execution. Meanwhile, at 9:43 a.m., I was sitting in my sunroom, a cup of Darjeeling steaming in my hand, the Art of War open across my lap. My cat, Athena, purred at my feet. My phone buzzed once, twice. I turned it face down on the table and kept reading. By noon, their panic had metastasized. A flower delivery appeared at my doorstep, cheap tulips, already wilting. 30 minutes later, a courier dropped off a Cobb salad from the deli near the office, a sticky note taped to the lid. We're sorry. Please sign. I opened the container, stared at the iceberg lettuce and rubbery chicken, and laughed aloud. 17 years at Harrison and Cole, and this was their olive branch? A $7 salad, no dressing. Passive aggression in its rawest form. I typed a note on my desktop sticky pad. 2 calls. 1 forged signature attempt. 1 Cobb salad. Still no accountability. Back at the boardroom, chaos had curdled into dread. Ethan paced like a hostage negotiating with himself. Chloe refreshed her phone every 5 seconds, as if sheer will could conjure a reply. Ryan whispered about internships with competitors. And Mandy sat in the corner, watching the clock like a countdown to execution. At 3:07 p.m., the CEO himself arrived. Charles Harrison had not set foot in a project room in 6 months, preferring golf courses and investor calls. But now he appeared in a crisp dark suit, cufflinks shaped like dollar signs, his expression carved from disappointment. He sat at the head of the table, eyes scanning the room like a father summoned to fix a group project gone nuclear. Explain, he said, voice flat as a canceled check. Ethan jumped in with a circus of buzzwords. We've had an unexpected delay in the Fortress finalization due to signatory logistics. We're exploring authorized proxies within compliance thresholds. Mandy didn't blink. Translation: Margaret's on PTO. We forged a workaround. Fortress rejected it. They will only accept her signature. Charles's gaze sharpened. So she's refusing to sign? No, Mandy replied. She's just not here. And per clause 11.4, she's the only one allowed to sign. No Margaret, no contract. The silence that followed was suffocating. You could hear the HVAC hum. Charles leaned forward, his voice a low growl. You cut out the one person whose name is on the contract? Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened again like a fish gasping for oxygen. I streamlined the roster for agility, he stammered. Cut redundancies. You cut the lock holding a $50 million door, Charles snapped. As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked down, color draining from his face. It's Joel, he whispered. Fortress's lead. He's asking if the board is prepared to void the renewal and renegotiate with Brightwell and Stokes. Mandy sat straighter. If Fortress walks, they'll walk straight to Brightwell. That's death. Chloe made a soft, strangled sound. We're going to lose it. My uncle, he trusted me. Charles exhaled, slow and sharp. Get Margaret. Pay her. Beg her. I don't care if you have to send a limousine, a marching band, and a notarized apology dipped in gold. Fix it. Back in my sunroom, the jazz playlist shifted to soft piano. Athena curled against my leg. My phone buzzed again, the sixth time that day. Ethan's voice, raw with desperation, filled the voicemail. Margaret, please. We need you. I know I made miscalculations. That's an elegant word for screwed up. I'm asking formally come back, just for the signing. I let the silence stretch before replying with 4 words etched in steel. I'll return. On terms. 2 days later, I walked back into Harrison and Cole. Not as an employee. Not as the ghost in the machine they'd spent weeks erasing. But as something sharper, heavier, undeniable. A consultant. No badge. No desk. No corporate email. Just a manila folder under my arm and a contract that tripled my hourly rate, printed on thick linen cardstock. 1 week of independent engagement, the terms written by legal with reluctant precision, signed reluctantly by the very hands that had tried to delete me. At the receptionist's desk, a young woman I didn't recognize reached for a visitor badge. I waved her off. I'm not here to visit, I said. I'm here for a signature. Mine. Eyes followed me through the corridors like I was a ghost in reverse once invisible, now undeniable. Slack messages must have lit up like fireworks. She's back. Is that Margaret? Why is she holding a folder? Because in corporate America, power isn't volume. It's proof. And my proof was written in ink. At legal's front desk, a courier envelope waited. Inside, a letter typed in careful serif font centered on the page. We, the undersigned, formally acknowledged the critical contributions of Margaret A. Ellison to the Fortress Dynamics account and recognize her exclusive authority as defined in Clause 11.4 to execute this renewal. Without her, this firm would not have retained its most long-standing strategic client. 3 signatures scrawled at the bottom: Charles Harrison, CEO. Ethan Cross, VP of Strategic Accounts. Chloe Simmons, Director of Brand Strategy. Chloe's signature was jagged, like the pen had fought her hand the whole way. I folded the paper cleanly and slid it into my coat pocket. Apologies are nice. Written ones are billable. Ethan appeared in the hallway just as I turned the corner toward the executive suite. His shirt was freshly pressed, but his face betrayed 2 sleepless nights. Margaret, he said, voice breathless, rehearsed. I wanted to say, I didn't realize. I mean, I was out of line. I walked past him without pause. Apologies are nice, I said, my voice level. But written ones are better. He fell silent, his words dissolving into the sterile air of the hallway. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was different than I remembered. Fortress Dynamics was already seated, their expressions composed but sharp, like courtroom jurors who had seen too many excuses. Joel Maddox stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back. When he turned, he smiled not the polite smile reserved for strangers, but the genuine kind reserved for continuity. Margaret, he said, you look well. I feel expensive, I replied. He laughed once, then slid the contract across the table. It was open to the signature page, my name pre-printed in bold black letters. Margaret A. Ellison, Strategic Account Custodian. For 17 years, that name had been the quiet foundation of Harrison and Cole's most valuable client. Now, in this single line, it was the fulcrum on which $50 million balanced. I picked up the pen, signed with one deliberate stroke, and set it down. Joel nodded, the weight of the contract sealed. On behalf of Fortress Dynamics, he said, Thank you for maintaining continuity when others tried to rewrite it. I met his eyes. I don't maintain continuity, I said, standing. I am the continuity. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. Vindication doesn't ask for ovations. It asks for clarity and the check that clears. From my folder, I pulled out 5 holiday cards. Heavy stock, deep red with gold trim, Fortress's logo embossed in the corner. I passed them across the table, inside each in my own hand. To continuity. To remembering who built the bridge before you try to cross it. Joel smiled, slipping his card into his briefcase like an artifact. Behind me, Charles Harrison finally found his voice. Margaret, he began, his tone rehearsed for contrition. On behalf of Leadership Dash. I raised a hand. You said I was off the roster. A pause. The room went still. You were right. Silence held the air taut. Ethan looked at his shoes. Chloe stared at her laptop as if it could erase the past. Ryan fiddled with his pen like a boy caught cheating on an exam. I gathered my coat, folded the apology letter deeper into my pocket, and turned to leave. At the reception desk, the young woman asked gently, "Should I validate your parking?" I smiled. No need. They're paying for the whole damn lot now. The winter air outside was sharp and clean. I pulled on my coat, each button fastening like a final stitch in a wound that had already scarred. The city bustled around me, indifferent, but I felt untethered in a way I hadn't in years. For 17 years, I had belonged to Harrison and Cole. To their contracts, their crises, their silences. For 17 years, I had been the ghost in their machine. Not anymore. They erased me from the roster. But they forgot. I own the contract. The snow had long melted by the time I left Harrison and Cole for the last time, but in my mind, that winter stayed frozen. Not because of the humiliation, or the weeks of erasure, or the cheap tulips they tried to pass off as an apology. No, it lingered because of what it revealed. Power doesn't vanish when people pretend not to see it. Power endures where it was built, in the ink of a clause, in the memory of a client, in the quiet record of work that speaks louder than anyone's volume. We often imagine betrayal as a sudden blow, a dramatic fall from grace. But more often, it arrives in whispers. A missing invitation. A roster without your name. The hollow praise that avoids giving credit. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of those whispers, you know the truth they cut deeper than the loudest dismissal. Because they ask you to doubt yourself, to wonder if maybe invisibility is all you deserve. But here's the lesson. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest blade you can wield. Margaret Ellison's Story My Story isn't just about one woman in one firm. It's about anyone who has ever been erased, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside by louder, flashier replacements. It's about the uncelebrated backbone of every company, every team, every family, the people who keep things from falling apart when no one else is watching. And when the moment comes, because it always comes, those people, the invisible ones, hold the ink that matters. The signature. The continuity. The trust that cannot be faked or replaced. So if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own story, remember this. You are the continuity. And when others try to rewrite the script without you, let them. Because paper burns, applause fades, rosters change, but the truth is carved in places they can't touch. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had your name erased from a win you carried on your shoulders, share your thoughts below. Tell us your change log. Because stories like this aren't just mine. They belong to everyone who's been overlooked but never defeated. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, tales of ghosts who became queens, of whispers that turned into thunder, subscribe. Not for me, but for you. For the reminder that even when the world forgets, your work, your signature, your name still endures. In the end, the roster was theirs. But the contract? The contract was mine.